The time is 7 p.m., so we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, can we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Pulaski,
Here.
Trustee Della Penna,
Here.
Trustee Domke,
Here.
Trustee Forsythe,
Here.
Anissa, here, Trustee Burkowski,
Here.
Trustee Trejo.
Here. We have a quorum. We'll move on to presentation of the prepared agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Seeing none, that motion carries. We'll now move on to Village Board public comment. Anyone wish to provide a comment on a topic or an agenda item may address the Village Board in person during the public comment and public hearing segments of the Village Board agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. The board also has adopted the IML Civility Pledge, which states, in the interest of civility, I pledge to promote civility by listening, being respectful of others, acknowledging that we are all striving to support and improve our community, and understanding that we each may have different ideas for achieving that objective. Madam Clerk, did anyone submit a request to speak in advance?
In advance.
If you just, sir, if you don't mind, just sit at the chair there and speaking to the microphone clearly so that everyone at home watching can hear you as well. And if you don't mind stating your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Ted Saka. I own Master Tech and Master Lube on Roselle Road. I spoke in the past about the bearing of power lines and, communication lines and stuff like that. I don't know if anything has been advanced on that or anything. I did talk to the Congressman Raj about getting a grant, and he forwarded it to one of his assistants, which they're interested in it. So, but you have to have something to present to them.
Yep. So one of the things that we did is we've undergone in our perspective, it's called streetscaping. So that would be the where possible, the undergrounding of utilities, the introduction or the improvement of pedestrian lights and street lighting, and the improvement of pedestrian pathways. So those are kind of one by itself usually isn't attractive enough for anyone to be interested in pursuing, but group them all together, it's now a package. I will turn to Public Works. I know we've been advancing the engineering for a lot of these grants. We have to be in a position to be ready to build, and we haven't gone through all the studies yet in order to do that. So could Public Works give us an update maybe on those?
Studies in general. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
For the Irving Park Road study, we have applied for a grant application. Utility burial is not grant eligible, so that would all be village expense. The Roselle Road, we're pursuing it more from the pedestrian perspective as opposed to the streetscaping perspective, but we have also applied for grants for that as well, and those are in preliminary engineering. When you're looking at the cost to bury utility lines, the cost is about $3 million a mile, and that doesn't include engineering or any right-of-way acquisition needed. So that's just a rough number, but that's good budgetary number to look at.
Yeah, so we've looked at the entire Roselle Road corridor from the northernmost end all the way to Bloomingdale, and then we've looked at Irving Park from all the way from the airport all the way to Medina, essentially. So certain areas we have the capacity to underground utilities. Other areas we would probably likely have to raise them just because the ground is already congested with other burials, or there's just not enough space today. ComEd requires quite a large amount of land that they need to have to bury things in. Per state statute, ComEd is not legally required to essentially, they have to pay for the cheapest option, and above ground is always the cheapest option, which leaves us to bear the burden. The state does not provide grants to us for utility burial. Once we have projects that are ready, we usually apply for any and all grants. So we've been very lucky with Congressman Krishnamurthy's office for getting grants. He helped us with a lot of other funding projects in the past. So I think these are things that we'll definitely pursue. But we're in the preliminary engineering phases. So it's something that I think we're closer to than we've been in the past, but we don't necessarily have a date affixed to it until we have funding secured. So.
Yeah, but you're talking.
Correct. So I know, so we'll be continue to pursue that information once we get to those right points of initiating the project. So, and as a property owner, you'd probably be approached about right-of-way acquisition in order to make that a reality. So.
I was just wondering, because they were interested in the whole thing. And I don't know if Raj is going to be elected tomorrow. The Republican or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing, there was another topic. Yeah. So get another 3 minutes.
Well, you get 3 minutes, but you haven't exceeded your 3 minutes yet.
I mean, they can bring, if it's liquid in that, they can bring it over by me and dispose of it. You know, I have safety cleaning.
Okay. We'll pass that along to Green Roselle and the people that put that on. So thank you. All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Do we have any other members of the public here tonight to address the board? The record show none. Tonight is the beginning of our fiscal year 2025 budget process. So it's an exciting endeavor where we go through all the nuts and bolts. So tonight's one and only topic for public discussion, at least that is, will be that. So to kick us off, I will turn it over to Village Administrator Jason Balowski.
Thank you, Mayor. As you said, tonight is staff's presentation on the 2025 proposed budget. I want to first thank and acknowledge the management team and their role in this. Took a little more effort this year for the reasons that we'll speak to, as far as a little secondary reviews that we had to do before we presented the proposed budget to you all. As you know, we've kind of had an initial preview with individual trustees over the last couple of weeks. So with the proposed budget, I'll ask Brian to advance those things for me, or Tom, if that's okay. So I kind of want to start with kind of the factors influencing the budget development. As you know, earlier this year, the village obtained home rule status, and with that came some implementation of some new taxes, home rule sales tax, which is effective January 1st of 2025. And then you did your local motor fuel tax. Both those primarily are identified as funding sources for capital. And then you made some modifications to existing food and beverage and your natural gas utility tax. And really for that, given the lag and the ability to have a little more confidence in projecting out this revenue, particularly home rule sales tax, where we won't actually have receipts in hand until April of 2025 for January sales. A lot of this will have greater clarity around the impact of these revenues really mid-year next year. Along with some of the local decisions that the board made, there are state and federal policies, obviously national as well as international. Events certainly have an impact on the economy, which certainly has an impact trickle down to us, as much of our tax revenues are based on consumerism, as well as corporate profits and individual income tax returns. So the state of Illinois made some changes in their tax policy, which will go into place January 1st. That should result in additional revenue for the village. They made some modifications to really state sales tax that through remittance from the state to us should benefit Roselle, particularly with the home rule sales tax that now will be collected really on all kind of sales. So we hope that will be a positive, but again, until we see that performance of those changes, we don't know what that will mean. And then certainly the ongoing kind of just federal economy and some of the challenges that we're facing with that. And then finally, as you all know, our general fund is our main fund that we fund all of our operations, employees through. And right now, those expenditures are outpacing our revenue. And certainly first and foremost, one of the first expenses we put in our budget are our pensions, as we're committed to the 100% funding of that. A few other kind of factors that came into play as we were developing this budget was trying to limit, one, the property tax pursuant to the board's resolution. Now becoming home rule, you are not subject to property tax cap, but you're honoring as if we were. So that is reflective in the budget. Also trying to minimize the water and sewer as well as the CIS surcharge increases. Water and sewer really fund the operations of the water and sewer divisions. The CIS trying to, one, obviously honor and adhere to the resolution you approved for setting the ceiling on surcharges now that we're home rule and we do have the home rule sales tax that was approved by you. And then finally, the proposed budget reflects eliminating the vehicle sticker program. Again, one of your directions to staff was to present a budget that did that, and this does reflect that. Kind of ongoing from a village service perspective, we're trying to continue to align our resources with our internal capacity. And where you'll see that in the budget is the in-housing of paramedic services, going away from contractual and bringing them in-house, not only as a cost savings, but certainly I believe would set us up for a service improvement by making those our employees, as well as the full implementation of development and engineering services department, combining community development, economic development, and engineering into one department out of Village Hall. Are a few kind of programs or services that we're looking to improve through the proposed budget. Finally, our economic development activities, we continue to pursue those and grow our base. Have some active discussions going on that would do just that. But with those, it is a long game. And I wish some of those, we had a little more certainty around where those will land, particularly as it could result in additional revenue in our budget, but right now have to be conservative and really don't reflect any sort of net revenue increase from any particular economic development projects such as Firewater that is expected to be operating sometime, later next year, but we don't reflect anything remarkable from a revenue perspective there. And, as we know over the last maybe 2 years now, our need to invest in infrastructure and continuing to do that through this budget. You got kind of the CIP, the capital improvement plan presented to you last meeting. And this, again, will hit some of the highlights of that, just to remind you of some of the the projects that are being accomplished through the implementation of that plan. So the next couple slides will really I did some bullet points under each of your 5 strategic priorities in your strategic plan and how I believe we are achieving those priorities through various ways. And the first one being the fiscal sustainability. It as I opened up with, it's really a need next year to monitor the performance of the economy on our budget, monitor our budget, carefully monitoring revenues and expenditures, being prepared to make decisions if things don't, if our conservative estimates are wrong and things are, expenditures far out project revenue, then we'll have to make some changes quickly. But we do honor the 45% minimum general fund reserve that's maintained in this budget. And also, as part of your strategic priorities and one of the outcomes of this budget, I believe, is a need to revisit some of your fees, just to ensure that they're aligned with the services being provided. Many things haven't been looked at in a long time, and I think staff's prepared to spend a little more work on that. One, from a home rule perspective, we're able to do a little changes to some of our programs and look at more of a licensing approach, and I think with that, maybe commensurate changes to some of your fee structures. From an operational sustainability and customer service, spoke about the internal capacity, realigning some of that both here at Village Hall, at the fire department as well. We have a little project for helping implement our organizational values project, continue to remain focused on the customer experience. As far as infrastructure for today and tomorrow, with the $110 million 5-year CIP, certainly shows your investment in infrastructure, $25 million investment alone in 2025, and again, looking to, you approve the implementation of home rule sales tax and local motor fuel tax as revenue sources to fund your infrastructure. And then finally is the redevelopment, local business growth. Plenty of programs and activities identified in the TIF districts, focusing our efforts really on sales tax generating businesses, particularly on Lake Street, but also other areas. Our enhanced investment in local tourism, bringing visitors to Roselle, continuing to see increased investment there. Certainly next year will be our inaugural year for the Petal Plaza, and some enhanced expenditures related to programming that. and continuing our community marketing and visibility. We accomplished a lot of that this year and look to continue to harness that, particularly as we shoot towards 2026 and the President's Cup. So before I get into kind of general numbers on general operating fund, any questions from kind of my opening, more macro introduction into the budget?
Any questions from the board? No, seeing none. I think I'd just underline or emphasize, I think that, you know, while we did achieve the referendum this spring to expand our tool set, we have to be moderating our expectations based on macroeconomic conditions, and that we can have all the tools in the world and we're better situated to weather whatever happens in the economy. That is a big thing that we have to be very careful about. And I think the team has done a very good job of making sure that we aren't swinging big and that we're being very measured in how we approach this, to make sure that we can continue to do what Roselle always has done and weather whatever happens around us fairly well. So, general operating fund.
Thank you, Mayor. So before you on this slide is our estimated year-end general fund operating budget. Shows revenues over expenditures by approximately $183,000. Your fund balance being at 46, your target's at 45%. So next year's proposed budget, as you can see there, the revenue is growing by 2%, but our expenditures more than double that at over 4%. So that's really that delta between, you know, revenues and expenditures that we work very hard to close through our efforts. And right now it will rely on about $339,000. And I guess our scorecard that we've had in your agenda packet kind of has it down to 335,000, but it does rely on using general fund reserves as a potential means to close that gap. So some key takeaways from the year-end 2024 budget. Again, revenues and expenditures, our expenditures are coming in under budget. That's the primary reason why we're showing that surplus of $183,000. Revenues are just about on target there. And there's your dollar amount, your projected fund balance. And in 2024, as we will continue to see and talk about 2025, some of the overall impacts that we're having with high pricing, some of the, certainly the increased cost of labor and other things that we addressed and dealt with in the past couple of years is here. It compounds. Those aren't one-time things. So that's kind of some of the headwinds we're up against relative to this budget. So for the 2025 proposed budget then, revenue increase of under, about 2% is $477,000 on a $24 million budget. The expenditures of about the increase of expenditures by about 1 million. From our main lines of revenue, that state shared, which is the LGDF, sales tax, local use, a good chunk of our budget is pretty much flat. It's very conservative. Certainly suggests that there's going to be very little growth in some of those line items at the state level. Some of that's a little unpredictable. We do rely on some of our partners in Springfield who put out some pretty good financial analysis and projections that typically are pretty accurate, but also conservative. So that's kind of main reason why we're seeing not much growth in overall revenue. It reflects basically a swapping out of the vehicle sticker revenue of what we would put in there as 560,000 and replacing that with the natural gas tax revenue that was previously in your general capital projects fund as the funding source to replace that revenue. There was a little reduction in expenditures by eliminating the vehicle sticker program, but not a significant amount, more for mailings, kind of processing and sending out the stickers. There's also a one-time revenue from the debt service fund reflected as revenue in the general fund. That's a fund that is running its course and may no longer be needed. And it's really interest income that's accrued over the years in that fund that is available to be used in this manner. And as I previously indicated, the property tax increase of about 4.2%, which is the PTEL of 3.4, and then that new growth. As non-home rule, you were always kind of levying beyond the PTEL to capture that new growth that is not subject to PTEL. and that's how we came to the 4.2%. And that levy was presented to you 2 meetings ago, or sorry, your last meeting. Couple other things relative from an expenditure standpoint, you're increasing your equipment replacement contribution. That's the annual contribution you're putting from the general fund into the equipment replacement fund for the future replacement of vehicles. This has increased dramatically over the years as the cost of vehicles and equipment have increased dramatically. Certainly has far outpaced the growth of the general fund on a percentage basis. But again, another pressure that I think is here to stay is the very high cost for equipment to be replaced. We realize a savings of about $108,000 by in-housing the paramedic services that's currently provided by Metro Paramedics, or Metro Paramedics, yeah. At 7 employees, that would be 6 kind of paramedics and then 1 EMS coordinator. That's more of a administrative office job versus the 6 paramedics that will be staffing the ambulance. Fully implements the Development and Engineering Services Department. As I alluded to before, that would kind of be looking at a January 1, that new department being fully operational downstairs. Continues your 100% funding pension contributions for your police, fire, and IMRF. Again, it relies on that one-time use of general fund surplus to make the budget balanced, and your projected year-end fund balance there, which is right at that 45% minimum according to your financial policies.
So before we move, any questions from the board or comments? I think a few things I would just highlight, the state's starting to look at their budget, especially to the 2026 years. And as we rely on the state increasingly for some of our funds, they're projecting for the fiscal year 2026 a $3 billion shortfall right now in their budget. And so I think these are things that we're very mindful of and watching. And I think that's what the team has done very well in our budget process to make sure that we take into account what the state of Illinois' health looks like. I think what's incredible though, as well, on paper, we are short, $300,000. We're holding line in the property taxes. We're not exceeding our authority that we made our commitment to this community on. And we're eliminating essentially $600,000 in revenue, rounding up, for vehicle stickers. So if we did not get rid of vehicle stickers, we'd obviously be in a surplus position. But I think the board has been very mindful of what the community has given us feedback on. And so I think that shows a lot of diligence and good work on staff's part that we have that small of a gap right now. And we're actually giving money back to our residents at the same time. So I think that's a difficult feat at times, especially in this condition. So just wanted to highlight those things. So I don't know if anyone else has comments or questions before we continue on to the motor fuel project, capital project fund and motor fuel tax fund. All right, carry on.
This is information we shared with you at your last meeting when we presented the 5-year capital improvement plan, maybe presented a little differently. Again, focusing on where that home rule sales tax revenue is identified both here in the general capital projects fund at $3.5 million, and then the remaining would be in the water sewer capital fund, but really showing that $3.5 million more in capital improvements next year solely based on achieving home rule status with the sales tax as well as the local motor fuel tax revenue, and kind of seeing that breakdown between streets, buildings, and others, and also showing us continuing to leverage grants that we've received, both federal and state, to complete our capital projects. From a water sewer capital projects fund, this is the significant increase from this year to next year. As you can see, with the about $11.5 million worth of revenue coming in from IEPA low interest loans, which will be funding projects primarily at Boderman beginning next year, or next year for construction. Seeing the $4.4 million in capital improvement surcharge funding, as well as then the remaining $1.5 million of home rule sales tax revenue showing up here in this fund. So you can kind of see then from a projects next year, as we spoke about our annual water main, annual lead service line, our treatment plant improvements really starting to kick off next year, and our ongoing investments needed in our collection system. Going back to, before I go back to general fund, I don't know if there's any questions on the capital.
Any questions on the capital side? And obviously, the dedication of the home rule sales tax is going to change over the years as we continue on the road to improving our water treatment plants. But I think we're tactically using this well because the time value of money today is infinitely better than if we wait to do some of these projects. And I think a lot of things that we see is a lot of referendums about building improvements and stuff like that. But if we maintain our buildings, then we don't have to go out and build new buildings, which is infinitely cheaper for the village. So I think what we've been able to do, I mean, our campus is 30 years old, so I think people underestimate the fact that things do need to be replaced at some point in time, whether you like the design or not. And so I think we've been really good about getting ahead of that, and this will help us in other areas, whether it's lead service line replacements, stormwater projects, or other things that we know are out there for the village. So
Here on the next couple slides will just be kind of some highlight expenditures, if you will, in the general fund, kind of those ones that aren't necessarily in here year in and year out. Maybe some are. But relative for next year, the performance evaluation revision project is that cultural or organizational values kind of implementation project. This would be a project to revamp our performance evaluation process that I believe is worthy of a revamp. And I think our employees would agree. Community relations, continuing to show our July 3rd fireworks and band. The new development and engineering services budget is fully included with the combining the new department. Kind of the next dialing down of economic development services and that consultant, further reducing their hours, but still, I think down about 5 hours a week. And kind of the corresponding costs there. And then some digitization of scanning records down in community development, police department, completing then their final purchase of portable truck scales for their enforcement program. With the fire department, an upgrade in their conference room, purchase of a fire blanket for electric vehicles. And then for public works, it's replacing various fleet machinery, and then also introducing some new kind of technology from our snow and ice control program, where we can start to gather a little more data, weather and temperature, pavement temperature, to better aid our response time and improve that hopeful customer experience with our snow and salting program. And then the continuing funding of the village's reforestation, surveying, and tree treatment program. Some other funds here, the tourism fund, that's kind of all your hotel motel tax money coming in, and the expenses going out are really tourism related. And really that $84,000 number is kind of that special events, that local tourism, that greater investment there, and various programs. The IT fund is an internal service fund. It's funded by all the other operating departments. And this is where we kind of summarize all of our IT spend across the organization, which is over $1 million annually. That's one fund that we continue to see much of kind of the general economic upward pressure on pricing, particularly in telecom. Here, a couple projects are the Telc is a consultant to help prepare us for a phone system upgrade. Also to do some audits of our telephone lines, hopefully reduce some costs while simultaneously working on preparing us to have to make a decision around our phone system. There's a replacement of the license plate reader system on the CSO vehicle for enforcing parking at the commuter parking lots. And then also our current wireless system is up for replacement. This is just hardware. We're able to kind of replace it utilizing staff and consulting IT. So this is just the equipment to upgrade our existing Wi-Fi system that's end of life, end of service. Kind of a couple other key funds are all of your TIF funds, your 3 TIF funds, and noting kind of the key projects. Many of these projects were previously covered under kind of capital as their ongoing funding of year 2 or year 3 of various kind of engineering and potential construction projects as it relates to pedestrian improvements on North Roselle Road, the Central Irving, continuing that streetscape program, and then your TIF 4 is your East Irving Park 1, which is where you'll see the revenue coming in for bond proceeds to purchase the garage from the developer there, demoing the Trinity Building, doing a traffic study on Lawrence Avenue, and a water main design on Howard. And then also, regardless of the outcome of the library referendum, kind of updating our redevelopment plan for the town center, kind of being a little more intentional now, about 10 years into our comp plan, and kind of doing a refresh of that to see what the community wants to see in the town center. And then highlighting here is what your projected TIF fund balances are at the end of next year. You can see the East Irving Park Road is the most active one, but has the least amount of money. And then the Central Irving has the most. And Roselle Nergy is there at about $1 million, and pending any redevelopment agreement with Lexington Homes up there, that number may change.
Any questions or comments from the board at this stage?
We've covered general fund, kind of reminded you on some of the capital, all your TIF funds. There's several funds that really have no activity this year. A couple funds are coming off. Your ARPA fund, your Build Illinois funds are kind of falling off, as those were one-time revenues coming in that are going to be expended this year. We have no proposed changes to the parking lots fund. So really the main next one would be water and sewer. So I'd ask Tom to start to talk through some of that from the operating fund as well as the general capital fund before kind of coming back together with some discussion with the board on proposed next steps.
So last call in general, I mean, we'll obviously have many opportunities to discuss it, whether tonight or at other meetings, but any final questions or thoughts before we move on to water and sewer? All right, Tom, take it away.
Thank you. So for the 2025 proposed budget, you'll see the revenues equaling expenditures. This is a fund that we want to make sure that the water rates that we're charging completely covers the expenditures. We did increase, we will propose an increase of the rates, but you can see right now that the fund balance at the end of 2025 is projected to be 28%, which was above the board's surplus minimum of 25%. So revenues are expected to increase by 1.1 million compared to the 2024 estimate, which is about 13%. Part of that is, the Metro 19 apartment complex. I expected it to be half a year. That was kind of going big on my part, but of course it hasn't opened yet. So we'll see that now coming through. So it includes a 0% increase or 0% decrease in water usage for the village as a whole, plus about 12 million gallons of water going through Metro 19. And then the water sewer fees represent about 98% of the budgeted revenues. So again, most of the revenues coming in are from water and sewer fees paid for by our customers. Expenditures increased by 934,000 over the 2024 estimate, which is about 11%. Most of that is water. We pay DuPage Water Commission for water. We expect their rates to increase by 30 cents per thousand. So we've incorporated that into the rate structure. So you see water goes up 50 cents to 975 per thousand. Originally that would be 20 cents, but then I added the expected increase. So they've been increasing their rates the last couple of years, 5%, which is the rate that's handed down from Chicago. So they're covering their costs, and then we have to cover our costs. DuPage Sewer would go up by 27 cents per thousand, Cook Sewer 13, and then the CIS 50 cents, as Jason mentioned before, which helps fund the water and sewer capital fund. So overall, in DuPage County, the overall rate is goes from 23.85 25.12, which is $1.27, and on Cook it's $1.13 increase per thousand gallons. As I said, the largest expenses, they're, 81% of our budget. One is water at about 3.3 million, personnel at 3.1, electricity of almost 500,000. Most of that for the two treatment plants. System maintenance of 242, supplies, water meters. We're continuing the water meter exchange. All of our older meters right now, I believe we're in 1994, 1995, replacing the meters from back then, replacing them with the smart meters. And then sludge disposal, which is another one of those that the cost keeps increasing as the trucking this waste is not cheap and it continues to go up. Water sewer capital side, as Jason mentioned, it's about $17.5 million revenue, 17.5 in expenditures. It all depends on the pace of the projects as we bid them out and as they get underway, but really the biggest is the Boterman work that is being done, that is being covered by the IEPA loans. We expect to have fund balance of 4.4 million at the end of 2025. A lot of that, we need those funds in order to pay for the projects, pay our contractors, and then we receive the money. Also, if there are other projects that come up, we have economic development plans for Lake Street. If those do come to pass, we would have the money to pay for the water and sewer mains. But again, we don't have anything in hand, but it would be nice to fund that via cash. So water capital is about 1.7 million. That's all water main replacement and the lead service line replacement. Sewer capital is almost $14 million, paid for by the IEPA loans. CIS rate will increase from $7.50 to $8, which is below the established ceiling that was done last year. Actually, yeah, last year. It was called for about $9, but we don't need the full $9. And then in 2026, you'll see it's $9.25, and then after that, it's $9.50 per thousand. And we intend to keep that held steady, but of course, it all depends on pricing and the bids and how these projects roll out. Water main replacement, about $1.5 million. Lead service line, 240. Boterman is at 9.15. The three projects you see there. And then a sanitary sewer collection. We are replacing the Den lift station. That's the lift station on North Roselle Road. About 850,000. And then sewer lining for 300. And then that CMOM, which is essentially, lining or in the Devlin Basin to eliminate the I&I we speak about. The smoke testing's been done. And some of those other tests have been done, and now it's time to do some projects to stop that. And here we have a map just showing where the lead service line replacement program is in 2025. You can see it's along Woodworth, trying to eliminate those lead service lines in that area. Part of it, the beginning would be making sure that there are lead service lines, confirming that, and then doing the replacements.
Any questions on the water and sewer operating and capital? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, with the exception of some major street projects where we have issued bonds as is permitted by the state of Illinois, we traditionally do not take out debt to maintain our system. And really, when it comes to these larger projects at the treatment plant, that's where we do take out these subsidized loans that are essentially 8%, or we'll call it less than 2% to be more accurate in that sense from a rate. But we always pay our projects in cash, unlike other communities that may issue debt or borrow in order to do things. We always, while we may not do as much as we would have liked, which is why we now have some additional revenue streams, we always pay cash for our programs. We're never taking on debt to maintain our system. If you don't mind, in the microphone for everyone.
Yeah, so both operating, yes, we do not borrow to pay for operating expenses, but yes, the programs, these annual programs, we don't do unless they're complete reconstructions, which is not part of the maintenance.
Thank you.
So, coming to an end here, about 3 slides, I think. Just the key decisions here that are before the board, as previously discussed, the vehicle sticker program and eliminating that. The in-housing of the contractual services and the cost savings associated with that. Understanding that a lot of our costs, given they're related to personnel and people, are in contracts and other things, are pretty tough to cut. And what I deem sort of non-discretionary when it comes to individuals working for us or contractual employees providing services to us. Also, kind of the history of the general fund, that over the years, the general fund has relied on transfers from motor fuel tax, general capital projects funding. Those have been eliminated over the years. Also, parking lots operating, the board transferred money from the general fund to parking lots operating over the last 2 years in order to address imbalance in that budget from the pandemic and really having no revenue coming in there due to decreased parkers, commuters, and then also the village board approving the new IGA with the fire protection district that shares in some of the ambulance revenue with them, decreased the revenue payments that they make to the village. And for all those reasons, again, showing the utilization of the general fund reserves to balance this budget. I think the important thing is certainly showing the use of both general fund reserves as well as interest income transfer would only be necessary really at the end of the year. You don't need to make that transfer day one. It is one of those that on paper we will present a balanced budget. Whether or not you choose to use that revenue at the end of, by December 31st of 2025, there's a lot of time between now and then before you actually have to realize utilizing that because of all the changes and some of the other things we previously spoken about. Next year really is kind of a wait and see in some of these areas. We budget low and hope that things overperform. In the case of expenditures, we budget 100% that everyone will be here every day of the year. It often doesn't play out that way, but it could. So we budget high on the expenditures and conservative on the revenue. So continue to use the treasurer's report, the monthly touch points with the board, and communicating our overall economic performance. And then also, as I hit before, those expenditures outpacing revenue growth. You have it in your strategic plan from a revenue diversification, but I think it's incumbent upon us to work together on evaluating your revenue and expenditure, your forecasting, to ensure your priorities and what you want to achieve as a board and the resources required to do that, are aligned with your financial objectives to accomplish those. So as part of our individual meetings with trustees, there was some discussion around utilizing general fund reserves and what could be some other alternatives to that. So here are a few. There is the opportunity, we believe, to utilize home rule sales tax. We show it right now in the capital fund, both for water and sewer, as well as the general capital projects fund. $25 million in almost as much in capital is scheduled to be done next year as our entire general operating budget. That operating budget is the one that supports all those capital projects fund. It's our engineers, it's our personnel, it's our finance, collecting the money and the employees doing the work and managing those projects. All that comes out of the general fund. So it could be an opportunity to reflect here what we show as 5% or $240,000 of our estimated home rule sales tax going towards the general fund to really offset those costs associated with managing the programs. Not eliminating the vehicle stickers is certainly an option, or something less than the current kind of $45 per vehicle sticker, maybe something less than that, keeping the program around, but at a different level. knowing that right now that gap is $334,000. And if those aren't accepted, or you want us to come back with looking at the expenditure side of the ledger, we are prepared to do that. We can turn around something for you at next meeting. But obviously, as I spoke to earlier, depending on how big of a number is that you're asking us to get to, it's going to be challenging to get there without impacting employees or service, not necessarily directly, maybe, wages of employees, but more services, tools, equipment, other programs that I feel could potentially have a negative impact on us being able to provide our services in the current manner that I think you and the community expect. But we're certainly prepared to bring something back to you at the next meeting, if that's what you direct us to do to aid in the further discussion of the budget. So with that completes our staff presentation on the budget, kind of upcoming board meetings, both next week, the 11th, the 18th, and then ultimately the budget will be approved on the 2nd along with the tax levy.
Thank you so much. So can we go back to the last slide though, by any chance? So I think, if there's I first want to open up for general comments and questions, but then do you want to go around the table to get feedback on the, options being presented by staff? So any initial reactions or comments before we jump into trustee Trejo?
Yeah, initial was the whole, the capital fund, the equipment replacement fund, the 600 to 650. I just think as that starts eating up more and more, the dollars keep, increasing for all this equipment. I feel like our purchase cycles have been pretty steady in the last decade. So I feel like at some point we should probably start looking at extending some of those purchase cycle times in order for us to avoid having to transfer that much money, and just kind of reducing our overall expenditures. That's probably the main comment I'd say. Do you want to talk about this now, or are we going?
Well, I want to see if there's anything else, but then, yeah, just to keep it focused, but, we'll go with trustee Domke and then trustee Delapenna.
This 339 or 334, whatever number we're using, is the largest difference since I've been on the board. And to your point, we always underestimate revenue, overestimate expenses, and we've always ended up balancing, even if we were very close to being unbalanced. My question is this a one-off, or is this our normal operating expenses for the following years? Because if this is a one-off, that's different than if we don't have enough revenue to support what we think is necessary every year, we either have to get more revenue or cut expenses, right? So getting more revenue is what we're talking about up there. Is this a one-off, or is every year going to be a $330,000 or $500,000? Are we not getting enough revenue to support what we have?
I mean, it's going to be hard to tell you, 2 years from now, what our budget may look like, but I think there is definitely, peaky, there could be a structural imbalance, right? Where you're looking at your growth of expenditures and we know our growth is when it relates to collective bargaining agreements, pension payments, health insurance premiums. I mean, they go up and they have been going up and they don't go down. And if those are outpacing our revenue, then it won't be a one-off.
8% of our expense is personnel.
At least, yes, in one way or the other.
10% is where we would want to cut because it's more variable than personnel.
Yeah, I mean, it's often stuff that supports personnel. It's training, it's equipment. I mean, there's, some commodities, but generally we are a people business. We're a service business, so we are people heavy. And those services that we don't provide as a village, we are contractually obligated to pay other people like DUCOM, our attorneys, we have contractual obligations to pay those other things. So it doesn't leave a lot left to identify, cuts. If you think 80 to 90% are sort of that non-discretionary, for every dollar you cut, 90 cents, you're looking at that. We certainly wouldn't look at that first, but it would be challenging without, hitting the personnel side of it. We remain conservative in our growth of our revenue, but, absent probably some larger sales tax generating opportunities, which is partially what we're going after on Lake Street. I think that's what we really need to continue to focus on, is growing that sales tax base. Some of the state shared revenue, a little out of our control on the growth of that. That's really subject to just kind of more macroeconomic growth, versus some of the stuff that maybe we can control closer to home.
Wayne, I think I would opine that we know that we've had material costs inflation that's really hit us hard, and that hasn't gone down, and we were hoping it would, and it just hasn't. We feel that at home too, right? And I think labor costs have gone up, but I think what Jason highlights is really important is I think we've had some really reasonable, fair contract negotiations with our employees. So I feel like our costs in-house that we can directly control, I think staff in this board has done a really good job of controlling it. What I think we're seeing is the fact that we don't operate in a vacuum, and decisions that I still stand by, that the board has made, or boards have made that I wasn't on, to consolidate or to, outsource some things, like DUCOM services is now consolidated. We have water services being provided by an outside entity, things that we could not do ourselves, right? Those entities are now dealing with the same cost increase we are, but we don't really have a whole lot of control over what they're passing on to us. And so I think there's opportunities where, like insurance, Jason sits on that board and is taking a leadership position when we have our staff members involved in those, and Chief Bozick is involved with DUCOM. Like, we have our staff in key positions to help with those boards, but we're one of many different decision makers on those. And as their costs go up, they're passing it on to membership. And that's where there's things like the DuPage Water Commission trying to secure their own water instead of through the city of Chicago. That will pay back dividends to our residents, but not for 20 years, right? We could see water rate cuts, I would argue, if we had full end-to-end control, but we don't have that today. And I think I don't want to call, they weren't short-sighted decisions, but the more we rely on outside agencies, we have a little bit less control over how those costs get passed along, and, we have to pay our fair share on that. But I will say, on the revenue side, I think we did eliminate a big revenue stream, which is vehicle stickers, right? And so we put ourselves in a position where we're trying to do something, and it's a direct impact on the budget. So I think the fact that we only have a 339 when you're getting rid of 560 is not too bad. The other thing I think is all that new revenue that we have put in place is going to what we said it would go towards: infrastructure, right? We're not using that revenue that people voted on to balance things or do things. It's actually going towards projects like we promised the community. And so I think in that sense, we're working to grow it, obviously, and I think a lot of that is, as rates have climbed up, a lot of that economic development activity, everyone's hesitant, but I think we're seeing that interest come back, and I think we're just going to see that. Hopefully we can turn the corner and get some more businesses in town here. So I know I've got a number of meetings this week on that note, but did that answer?
Well, it's still
It's
the
more of a theory at this point, right? So
fundamental question a person might ask that doesn't know all the nuances would say, you're bigger than your britches, You can't support this. Not getting enough revenue to support these expenses.
That's pretty much personal in society in general. If
Yeah.
you don't get enough raises to cover what the cost of your goods go up, you're
Right.
losing ground every year. We're in
But
a-
then there might be some discretionary expenses, like let's say that generator for 150,000. Is it maybe not this year? Or let's say we make a difference, or we balance the budget now, and then in June, we up the budget when we know that June, the revenues are exceeding the estimates. That's what I want to, do we balance the budget now, and then 6 months from now, we reevaluate the budget and then put the power generator on the.
Yeah, I mean, one, the budget's balanced now, right? It's just how it's being balanced, I think, is what's under discussion now. So I want to make sure we're leading with it's balanced, right? There are units who don't do balanced, and we don't have.
Taking money out of reserve to
Yeah,
balance.
correct. You're tapping into your savings.
within our policy, because we have more savings and we encourage
That's
ourselves.
why I asked
Yep.
if this is a one-of, because we
Right.
can't do this every year.
Yeah, it's right. It's hard to predict what the annual performance of this organization will be in 2026 or 2027, or if there's something new or something weird comes along that positively or negatively impacts us. But in the perfect world, am I recommending having to utilize your savings? No. But, given a lot of what I talked about earlier, I feel and confident in this budget and optimistic that you won't have to tap into that to close that gap by the end of the year. But relative to the generator, while it's a different fund, it's not general fund, that's the capital projects fund. But nonetheless, that approach is something that the board could discuss is, are there certain items that we take out of the budget? Not because we don't think we need them, but because we want to remove it to get expenditures down, and then we can always come back and continue to monitor and come back to the board and say, here's something that was in there that, that we originally proposed, we took it out, and now at mid-year, for example, we can revisit them. So that's certainly something we've done in the past, the board has done in the past, that we could do again.
We're kind of temporarily on hold until we see how it goes at halfway point of the year.
Yeah, I mean, like anything, right? You have a plan and you kind of wait and you determine to pull the trigger or not.
Depends what quarter you want to spend the money too.
Trustee Delpena and then trustee Trejo.
You want to just go back through the alternatives? Is that what you're?
Just general comments or themes before we get to the alternatives, but if we want to, did you have a general comment?
I just had a question on your.
And then we'll go to the,
So I just want to make sure I'm clear, because on slide 26, it says we're eliminating vehicle stickers, so we're pulling 560 out, but we actually are transferring from the capital projects from the natural gas revenue, right? So that's just a net like 11,000 down, right?
Correct.
Just wanna make sure.
so we can, if there's no other general comments, we can jump into the three options. So it sounded like you wanted to get started.
The alternatives, I mean, we didn't promise people we'd get rid of vehicle stickers, but we basically alluded to the fact that if we would do that as soon as we can. So I don't think we should not do that right now. We should definitely eliminate the vehicle stickers if we can. As far as moving a budget, a portion of the home rule sales tax into the general fund revenue, as long as it goes towards those personnel costs and we're just not transferring it out, I think we're okay with doing that as well. I kind of like the idea of putting some of those things on hold temporarily, and we can we can revisit this every quarter if you want instead of every 6 months. I'd be fine with that.
So a combination of option 1 and 3.
Correct.
Okay.
So to Tom's point, that would be the way I look at it. If this is a one-of, we do what we're doing. If this is going to be a constant, then a portion of the home rule sales tax would be the sustainability.
Well, and I think to staff's point earlier too, we could put it on paper, but if we don't need to do that transfer does not have to occur. Is that a correct interpretation of the conversation we've had thus far?
Yeah, correct. I'm looking at Tom, he's not saying no.
I was taking notes.
I know he wasn't paying attention. Showing transfers from one fund to the general fund can wait.
It'd be realized at the end of the year if needed at that point. So we could easily do a combination of 1 and 3. And, to Wayne's point, if things continue to do better than we expect, then that's something that we don't actually have to realize. If so, we have that plan in place. So.
Fair enough.
We'll just continue down the line. That's okay. Trustee Linnea, not to put you on the spot.
So to Wayne's point, I like the idea of taking a look at anything that is possibly not, that can be put on hold so that we can get closer to balancing things, which I guess is going along with the point number 3 of directing staff to identify further reductions. I'm okay with point number 1. I am very adamant about not going back to the vehicle stickers.
We'll just continue on. Trustee Trejo.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should get rid of vehicle stickers. I'm okay with transferring the 240,000 general fund from the home rule sales tax to general fund. And then I do think we should take a look at the expenditures. And I think, we do mid-year budget review. I think the thing is with the home rule sales tax with a lot of unknowns, I do like the idea of maybe revisiting it, whether it's like monthly or quarterly. I think one thing I called out in our meetings is I would like to get like a spreadsheet of all the capital projects that we're using home rule sales tax for from the public work side to see where we're coming in budget versus what the actual bids are, to see if like we could even get more of that sales tax back into the general fund. Because if we're budgeting, let's say $4 million for a project and it comes in at 3.5, well, there's 500,000 that we might be able to even transfer back to the general fund. So I think things like, whether it's so if you take the 240 sales tax, and even if you put the, let's say, reforestation on hold, that's 340 right there. Or there's other things in there, like the license plate reader, like, do we need that now, or is it something that we could hold off until March to discuss? Or February, or whatever the date is, like, it's like, when's the decisionable? When do we need to take action? And I think pulling some of those things out now, it could be a quick, in March, it's like, hey, our estimate was $1 million in sales tax and we're at like 1.2. It's like, okay, well, now we know we're 200,000 above. It looks like maybe we were a little conservative on the home rule sales tax, given we don't really know how it's gonna come in. And then I think we can pivot quickly, and say, yes, let's put that back into the budget. Whether, like I said, it's reforestation, it's, there's like a conference room upgrade in there for $20,000. Like, that's probably something that could be easily cut out for now. And like I said, at least speaking for me, I'm not saying that like the idea is bad per se, but it's like, if we need to hold off just to make that final call for a couple months, I don't think that's unreasonable.
Trustee Forsythe?
Yeah, I would like us to eliminate the vehicle stickers, and I'm okay with option 1 of moving the funds. And then I guess, like the other trustee said, we could look into the expenditures for future meeting.
Right, Trustee Burkowski, it's 5-0, so what's it gonna be?
What you're saying is anything I say is moot.
We still want to hear it though.
We still care about your opinion.
No, I agree with 1 and 2. 3, I'm not as hung up on, just because I imagine this is something staff has already done. This was part of our meetings with them to have talked about this already. This year, with the changes in how everything is going, I don't think we should make kind of drastic decisions based off of an unknown scenario like this. We're not even a year into home rule. We don't know how all of this is really going to shake out. To kind of Trustee Domke's point, is this something that's going to become a systemic $300,000-$400,000 a year, or is this a one-off? I think time would tell. So I'd be willing to kind of roll the dice with this year. We have the funds in the general reserve fund, and then kind of do what we are planning to do and revisit this next year. Because, even some of these things, like you guys were saying, they are one-off projects, kind of the revamping of office space, things like that. Even to Trustee Trejo's comment about the redoing a conference room, I feel like if we're already redoing a bunch of the stuff down there, we might as well do it all as one project. So it's kind of, I'm willing to go along with everybody else on this, but I think right now, this plan makes sense. And I think next year when we're going over the budget, it's going to be a much better time to kind of evaluate the effects that home rule has had, as well as kind of, we do have the huge major projects coming up that will kind of make our budgets look weird moving forward.
Yeah, year-over-year actuals are gonna be very challenging going forward for us to do a lot of heavy analysis on. But I think you've got consensus as far as direction goes, and I think the combination of option 1 and 3 also poses a little bit less of a dutiful exercise on staff, that it's only 100 instead of 340 that you're chasing after. So I think let's put together some options that we can review at the later meetings then from that standpoint. And just know that it's maybe not a commitment to cut the project entirely, but like we've done in the past, let's make these as mid-year budget calls and remove them from the budget that may be passed, but let's have those projects maybe still bidded or continue to monitor those so that we can move on those as quickly as possible. I think one thing that we'll need to be mindful of is just the delay that we have in reporting. So I know we won't have a lot of, I would say, we will have some idea in April, but would you feel you'd have conclusive information enough for us to start having more meaningful conversations about the new revenue streams coming in from the home rule sales tax? When would be, 1 month isn't a trend, right? So we could have, motor fuel tax is a great example. We have 1 month, but what does that do next month, right? So I guess what point would staff feel we'd have enough information to have maybe more regular updates on the revenue stream to then discuss those projects?
So it depends on the revenue stream.
Good answer.
Your point about our local motor fuel is I was talking about that before the meeting started. Yeah, I can give you an extrapolation based on 1 month. And we're close to what we expected, but I don't know what the average, what the summer season looks like for that. And for the home rule sales tax, it won't be really until this time next year that I'll be able to give you that answer, because we don't start receiving it until April. And so that'll be, roughly 6 months where I can say, okay, this is where we are compared to what our regular sales tax is, and if it's coming in as expected, or if it's under or over.
So I'll say we'll probably need to have, with the recommendation, let's maybe put together some list of indicators that we would use to trigger conversations, whether that's bidding projects coming in under, a certain threshold, or other revenue streams coming in at a certain point. I think let's just have some trigger language in there so that way we understand what we'd be looking at, so that way we can bring these back in a reasonable point in time. But again, I think having to cut $100,000 in projects, I don't feel too anxious about that. And we can probably figure out something from that side of things. So any other points that the board wants to make for the deliverables?
Yeah, just one point, just piggybacking off what you're saying in terms of revenue, but we also have the expense side, right? So as we start bidding things, if they're coming in under, like you said, it's only 100 grand. So if we get early in on bids and they're coming favorable to what we budgeted, it's like, hey, there could be a few big projects that are, let's say, $300,000 under budget. And it's like, okay, well, there's like the gap right there. I mean, and it's actually a positive 200,000 then. So I think that's like the two pieces of the puzzle that we're looking at.
We also know things also don't happen that we plan a budget and they get pushed out to the following budget year. So we might be able to pull things up depending on that too. So that is a funny way of happening too. So, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say one more thing to the natural gas tax. That's an unknown.
Yeah, we don't know that one
We
yet
don't,
either.
we're only basing that on the information that was provided by NICRA.
Could be better, it could be worse.
Well, yeah, and so that's why, to your point, there's a lot of variables in this one that we're unsure of.
And I know this is a lot of dense information, and I know it can make people's heads spin at home, but I think the fact of the matter is we are on very solid financial ground. And I think the fact is that we're being very intentional about how we move forward with it. And I think the fact is we're talking about one fund. We have many other funds that make up arguably more money that we spend, and the way we budget is very key to make sure that operation, or rather the projects for the community, do not suffer for the fact of operations. And I really have appreciated the philosophy this organization has taken with it. And I think the one thing that people often have criticized or had questions about is your reserves. Why do you have more than you say you were going to have and whatnot? And we have to have a structural deficit in order to pay down those reserves if we want them to be lower, right? So to some extent, if we want to pay down and get back to 45%, we're going to have to spend more than we have in order to make sure that we're not holding on to money and not spending it for the community in the right way. So appreciate the work that goes into this. I know budget season really kicks off in full earnest really in August. So it's been a long time coming, but we appreciate it. And I think like everyone said, we're going to be learning and watching a whole lot next year to see what happens. So thank you so much. With that being the case, we do have an opportunity for other business. Is there any other business for discussion only from the board tonight? All I'll say, I'd be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to comment. It's obviously election eve. And so all I would say is that I think that, regardless of the outcome, and I doubt anyone will know what really happens on a federal level tomorrow night, that I would just encourage everyone to remember that we're all Americans. We are all neighbors, regardless of what your beliefs are, who you support, who you vote for, or if you decide not to vote, that is your right. But everyone has the obligation and the duty to vote and to work to make sure that we make this country a more perfect union tomorrow, whatever happens. And so I don't want people to fall into doomsday or whatnot. We have an obligation, each as individuals, to continue to make this country work. So we'll leave it at that. So before anyone in polling data comes back, so I'm on the record. So no one can say one thing or another. With that being the case, could I get a motion to convene executive session to discuss collective bargaining with IAFF and Local 150, and as well as personnel? No final action will be taken, and we will be adjourning from executive session. Is there a motion? Is there a second? All those, roll call, please.
Trustee Della Penna.
Aye.
Trustee Trejo.
Aye.
Trustee Domke.
Aye.
Trustee Forsythe.
Aye.
Trustee Lanisa. Trustee Prokopsky.
Aye. That motion carries. Thank you so much.